Hello YouTube. This video is about the second problem we encountered 2 weeks ago when we took this out for a test drive. And that was, although the brake pedal is nice and hard, it's not mushy, it takes too much effort. Now this is a Corvette style master cylinder that has a 1-inch bore in it. And we're going to replace it with this Wilwood master cylinder. Now this is a very pretty master cylinder, but the real difference between the two are this has a 7/8 inch bore and the one in the car has a 1-inch bore in it. And what should happen is the brake pedal effort for the 7/8 inch bore should be less than the one with a 1-inch bore. However, the 7/8 inch bore should have more brake pedal travel. The first thing we're going to do is pull out the old master cylinder and compare the push rod length and the spacing on the ears to make sure that it will even fit my application. The first step is to get the brake fluid out of the master cylinder. And I don't have a turkey baster, so I'm just going to absorb a little bit at a time and try not to spill any. It's about half of it right there. With the master cylinder empty and dry, we can proceed with taking the lines off. I have a pan underneath this, and we'll take this line off, and there will be fluid in the cylinder, the bore, but I have a plug, an inverted flare plug, that I can put in here to keep it from dripping. There's the plug. We have to remove this pin from the clevis, and it's a cotter pin holding it in place. And we'll take the cotter pin out, take the pin out, and now the push rod is free. Now we can unbolt the master from the firewall, and if we're lucky, the bolt won't turn, and we just take it off. And off comes the master cylinder. Now what we need to do is to compare the dimensions of the old master cylinder to the new master cylinder to make sure it's going to fit. And if I measure the distance from the face of the master cylinder to the end of the clevis, because that's how far the threaded rod is in, I have 3 inches, 0.480. And if I measure the new push rod, the thread is in the middle of that, and it is longer by about 1/2 inch. So if we have to, we can cut this off, and that'll fit just fine. The next measurement we have to look at is the dimension of the distance between those two holes and the center line of that hole. And to get a center line, you can measure from the outside of one to the inside of the other, and that'll give you the center line. Is 3 inches, 0.345. And our old master cylinder measures exactly the same. So the bolt pattern is correct. The last thing is, this is the mounting bolt for the master cylinder, which is plenty sloppy in the old master cylinder, but does not go through the new master cylinder. For now, what I'm going to do is use a smaller bolt and mount it up and make sure that this master cylinder gets bottomed out with the pedal. They emphasize that many times in the instructions, and specifically say that if one circuit fails, the other circuit doesn't take effect until about 60 to 80% of the pedal travel. So you have to be able to bottom the master cylinder out before it hits the floor. The original mounting bolts won't go through the hole. So what I'm going to do for right now is use a smaller bolt that does go through the hole, and we'll see if the push rod has the right travel to it. So what I have to do is put a lock washer and a washer on. And I'm putting a washer on because if it doesn't work out, I want to be able to return this, and the washer will keep the surface from being marred. And I'll pass the master cylinder through the firewall, and my lovely wife is going to put the nut on it. And we'll put the second bolt in, and my lovely wife will once again screw the nut on. The push rod is obviously too long, but maybe we can screw the clevis on and see if we can bottom the master cylinder out. And if I have to cut the push rod, it should still bottom the master cylinder out, and I won't have modified something so that I can't return it. Because the push rod is too long, I'm going to have to push the master cylinder in a little bit in order to get the pin in. And what we want to check is that the pedal hits the back of the master cylinder before it hits the floor, and it appears to do that. So we can proceed. Now that we've confirmed that the master cylinder has full throw, we have to take the master cylinder back off again and cut that push rod off so that there is no preload on the piston in the master cylinder. We'll remove the pin from the clevis and release the master cylinder from the pedal. We want these push rods to be the same length. So if I measure from the face to the end of that push rod, I have 3.345 inches. If I measure from the face of this to the on the rod, we find that it's too long. So we're going to mark it and we're going to cut it. Okay, I guess I own it now. We'll clean up the threads. With the push rod cut to the right length, if we were to screw the clevis all the way on, there's no room for the nut. So what we have to do is thread this further down so that we have room for the nut. That should give us plenty. We'll thread our jam nut on and our clevis, and we want to go right to the end of the clevis, which is right there, and bring the jam nut up, and we'll snug that up, but not too tight because we want to make sure it's right in the car. With Mr. Masking Tape holding the bolts in place, let's see if we can slide the master cylinder over the bolts without pushing through the firewall. Put a washer, a lock washer, and a nut on each one. Okay, we have next to no free travel there. Maybe I can take one more turn out of it. Let's try it. And now we got nothing. Interesting thing is that now the pedal hits the floor. Now the only reason I can think that happened is because when we tested before, we had a preload on the cylinder in the master cylinder, and we had enough throw to bottom out in the master cylinder, but now we don't. It can't be by much. I've bought the master cylinder. We're going to go forward. I know it's difficult to see, but there really isn't a good shot at what we're doing here. The next step is to tighten the jam nut because we got all the play out of the pedal, and we want it to stay that way. So we're going to tighten the jam nut like so. And as the last thing on the inside of the vehicle for a while, we'll put a cotter pin in the pin to keep everything in place. So this is the content of the hardware kit. We have one jam nut, which we've already put on the push rod, 2 sets of adapters, 2 plugs for one side of the master cylinder, the side we're not going to use, 4 aluminum crush washers, a dust boot, which I forgot to put on, so now I'm going to have to go back and put it on, and 4 screws to screw the cover on. This is going to be a pain because I got to go back underneath the dash. I thought it was done there. We'll take the jam nut that I was using off of the Wilwood and put it back on the original master. Take the jam nut that Wilwood supplies and put that on. Screw the clevis on to about where it was, and we'll have to go readjust it in the car. These are the 2 plugs that they provided, because you're only going to take fluid out of one side. We'll put a little anti-seize on the threads and the aluminum compression washer and the plug into the hole. We'll do the same thing on the rear. They provide 2 sets of line adapters, and we're using the smaller set, and it also gets the aluminum crush washer. And then these lines hopefully will screw right in. We have to bleed the master cylinder first. Wilwood provides a master cylinder bleeding kit, but I have these fittings that I made, and I like these because I can tighten them down just like I was going to put a brake line on. And I've jacked the back of the car up so that the master cylinder is level so that we can bleed it. With the master cylinder level with the car backed up, we can christen the brake cylinder with some brake fluid. And what my wife is going to do is gently pump the brake pedal to get the air out of the master cylinder. And what we do is just keep pumping until all the air is out. It looks like we got the front one bled, the back one still got some air in it. As you can see, we're not getting any major air bubbles anymore. We're just getting a little tiny air bubbles. And the instructions said that that was okay. So what we have to do now is take our bleeder line off and put our line to the brakes in. Now this is for the front and this is for the rear. So here we go. We want to do this with as little leakage as possible, but that's kind of impossible. And now we'll do the rear. So we've moved on to bleeding the brakes on the vehicle because we're sure that we introduced air in the lines with all the new master cylinder and connections up there. So my wife is in the driver's seat and she's gonna pump the pedal and we're gonna bleed the brakes. All right, down please. Up. Now if you watch, you'll see the air come out. Down, up, down, we're going to leave that. That's going to be good for this side. Last thing we're going to do is put the cover on, and then we're going to test it. So we'll put the gasket in, and we'll put the cover on so you can read it. And they give you 4 screws. And unfortunately, they make it an Allen, so you gotta go dig out the Allen wrench. Here we go. Well, I would call that a complete and utter success. It did exactly what we wanted it to do. It reduced the amount of effort necessary to apply the brakes. The only real difference in the master cylinders, other than the price, is the fact that this has a 7/8 inch bore and the last one had a 1 inch bore. We can now lock the brakes up, which we were never able to do. I think we accomplished what we set out to do. If you enjoyed this video, there will be more.